Dreadhalls. It's a horror game that doesn't really take any steps towards changing the basic elements of a horror game. By that I mean it doesn't really try to remake the wheel, it just goes with what has already been done with horror games. For the story, you play as a guy walking through the hallways of a large dungeon-like labyrinth and discover little bits of story through finding and reading scrolls and talking to stone heads that are stuck inside of the walls. The scrolls tell the story of people that found themselves inside the same labyrinth as you, and the heads tell of the downfall of society, where the place you are now wandering around in is the only safe haven. Although it's not really much of a safe haven considering how many monsters are lurking about. So that's a pretty nice and simple story, but leaves actually impressing the players up to the gameplay. Put simply, it's a maze game. Each level places you in a new randomly generated labyrinth with a single exit. Your goal is to make your way through the maze to the exit, grab an eyeball that is placed on a little plate in front of the door, then go through the door and return to the hub area of the game, which is a safe place for you to return to and unlock more areas from, thus progressing through the actual game. Of course, this being a horror game, there are going to be monsters lurking about through each maze, which are actually pretty diverse and interesting to look at. There's a teleporting raggedy girl, a tall shadow guy, a giant dog thing, gargoyles, a pale guy, and a floating meatball. Each enemy has different ways of attacking you, but none of them are really new to the horror genre. The girl gets mad if you look at her for too long and can teleport, kinda similar to Slenderman, actually. The shadows are just kinda stand there, and if you walk into them you'll die, but other than that they just will occasionally blow out your lantern, or will turn into a cloud and fly around. They're really more annoying than they are scary. The dog will charge you unless you hide inside of a small area where it can't reach you, so it feels kind of like a little nightmare situation where you try to escape threats by going where they can't reach you. The gargoyles attack you when you look away, so basically think of weeping angels from Doctor Who. The pale guy will attack you if you have a light on, and the meatball will attack you when you move around when he's watching you. So those are both pretty common traits for monsters in horror games and horror movies. As for in-game mechanics, there isn't much that the player can do, but there are just enough interactions that you actually feel like you're immersed in the game rather than just feeling like you're walking around an empty maze or constantly looking through menus or fidgeting with items. A main interaction in the game is the player's ability to keep their lantern fueled with the oil they find throughout the environment. And it's actually well made, as you can tell how much fuel you have based on the level of the light on the side of your lantern, and by noticing flickering in your light as it starts to run low. You can turn off and on the lantern to save fuel or to hide from certain enemies, which is an amazing choice as it adds more interactions and options for the player to help them get enveloped into the world. The interaction with the environment is limited to opening doors, which consists of turning the handles back and forth until it unlocks, and putting things into your inventory or taking them out to use them. To gather things, you grab them. Not really much of a surprise there, but yeah. To use items, you have to press a button on one controller to open up the inventory, and then you actually grab the item you want to use with your other hand and place it where you want to use it, rather than how desktop games work where you either interact with one object and you automatically use an item from your inventory on it, like if you try to open the closet door and it automatically uses the closet key from your inventory, or in games where you have to search through a list of items in an inventory screen before interacting with an object. You almost feel like you are actually grabbing it out of your storage or like a pocket. Of course, this feeling is limited by the fact that your items float in front of you, but it still gives you the feeling that you are actually interacting with everything you use. It also makes escaping enemies or quickly using items more stressful, as if your lantern begins to die and you need to go through a process of refueling it, that would be kind of difficult if you're being chased, or if you need to pick a lock on a door, you legitimately feel like you're stumbling through your pockets to find your keys before the thing behind you can get to you. So what? Dreadhalls is just nothing special then, and it's just a cheap attempt at making a new horror game? Honestly, no. It's a pretty incredible horror game despite it seeming so basic. So what makes it special then? The obvious answer is to say that it's a VR game. So I tried to think of a different reason for why the game is actually really enjoyable and why it did scare me quite a bit. The graphics are good, especially since the game is both an indie game and is one of the older VR games, but I don't feel like that's what makes this game good. The style is interesting, and the environments of the labyrinths change between levels, meaning you never really get a good grasp of what the maze is going to be like, and every level is going to feel different. You could get a clean castle with a dark and cramped hallway system that makes you feel so claustrophobic you need to take off your headset for a minute. Or you could get a dark and messy dungeon with skeletons and stretch out faces littering the area to leave you worried to walk around every corner. But even with the game's shifting environments, that's really cool, but it doesn't make a game as fun or scary as Dreadhalls was. So maybe it's the sound design, but even though the wails throughout the maze and loud footsteps that randomly play throughout the level are creepy, and the ambient music and sound always leaves you on edge, that still doesn't feel like it's what makes Dreadhalls special. So maybe it's the story, but you can play through a level without grabbing any scrolls or talking to any stone heads, and you still get the same amount of entertainment with just a little bit of background information missing. So is the thing that makes this game so good just the fact that it's a well-made VR horror game? Kind of, but kind of not. While its mechanics and enemies don't stand out against other horror games, the feelings this game gives you definitely do. You can't look away from your screen or get distracted by something on your desk because you are actually inside the game. Every time you walk around a corner and find yourself face to face with a monster, you don't just turn and look for the safest place to hide. You are legitimately face to face with a monster. And you have a legitimate fight or flight response, which mostly ends up being flight because you can't really fight in these cases, but whatever. You lose any sense of rational thought you had. I'm not exaggerating, my first few deaths were from running away in the stupidest ways possible and trying to hide from these guys in the dumbest ways possible. So, the biggest reason this game is so scary and fun despite its simple concepts is that it's in VR. Great, so how scary is it then? Well, it's absolutely terrifying. One big difference between this game and other horror games or movies is that you won't get as much of a chance for trial and error with different situations, and this is not associated with VR actually. After playing the game for around 4 hours straight, I had only seen some enemies one time, and because of how random the maps are laid out, the player may just happen to never run into an enemy, so once they eventually do find one hours into their playthrough, they'll just get this overwhelming feeling of, what the heck is that? What the heck are you doing? What do I do? What is this? Only to die without learning anything about the enemy. This means that if a player doesn't look at any guides for how to deal with an enemy, they're likely to get hours and hours of experience only to be reduced to a terrifying mess when one of the rarer monsters finds them. Along with that, interactions you have with enemies vary widely due to the fact that there are 6 monsters that all have different traits. Even if a girl or a shadow monster don't scare you because they mostly just stand still, the dog might get you because it's so aggressive and in your face when it finds you. Or maybe you don't find the flying meatball look scary at all, but you're terrified of seeing that pale guy whenever you turn a corner. There's going to be something scary for everyone that plays this game, and everything will be scary for a good chunk of people who do play this game. Along with the gameplay being designed to scare the player in a variety of ways, the fact that it's in VR makes the game special, and every element of the game works amazingly with VR. Minus opening doors, that's kind of messed up, but whatever. In this game, you always feel like there's something behind your actual body, not just behind the character you're playing as. When you think you hear something in the dark and hold out your lantern in front of you to get a better look, when you open a door and feel like there will be someone on the other side ready to grab you, when you're keeping your eyes on an enemy or watching a hallway while backing towards a door, you feel like everything is about to go wrong and it is terrifying. It feels like you are there. So, is this game extremely different from other horror games? Not really, no. This game is, however, an incredible and terrifying experience despite its simplicity, because it manages to put you into a situation where you don't think of the fact that it's a game, and you only think of the fact that you are terrified at what is in front of you.